Untold Files.
February 11th, 1953, 9:34 p.m. Rouse restaurant on Pleasant Avenue in East Harlem. The kind of place where deals were made, treaties were signed, and occasionally, wars were started. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson walked in wearing a midnight blue suit, fedora tilted just so, moving through the restaurant like he owned it, which, in a sense, he did. Not the building, but the respect, the fear. The unspoken understanding that when Bumpy Johnson entered a room, you paid attention. He was there for a sit-down with representatives from the Genovese family. Routine business, territory lines, profit splits. The kind of boring negotiations that kept Harlem independent and the Italians happy. Bumpy sat at a corner table with Illinois Gordon and Marcus Smooth Williams flanking him. Across the table sat three Italian mobsters, Sal Moretti, a capo in the Genovese crew, Tony Bianchi, an enforcer built like a refrigerator, and Vincent Vinny Matches Calabria, a made man with a reputation for cruelty and a smile that never reached his eyes. The conversation started civil. Numbers were discussed. Percentages were negotiated. Wine was poured. And then Vinny Matches made a mistake that would cost him everything. They were discussing a shipment of heroin coming through the docks, Bumpy's territory, Italian product. Bumpy wanted a bigger cut, 15% instead of 10. Sal was willing to negotiate, but Vinny laughed, not a polite laugh, a mocking one. "You want 15%? Vinny said, lighting a thick Cuban cigar. "You think you're worth that much, Bumpy? You and your little Harlem crew?" Bumpy didn't react, didn't move, just watched. Illinois tensed. Marcus's hand moved toward his waistband, but Bumpy gave the slightest shake of his head. Not yet. Vinny took a long drag on his cigar, blew smoke across the table toward Bumpy's face. "You know what I think?" Vinny said, leaning forward. "I think you're getting old. I think Harlem's getting soft. I think maybe it's time we remind you who really runs this city." Sal put his hand on Vinny's arm. "Vinny, come on." But Vinny shook him off. He was drunk, cocky, stupid, the worst combination. He stood up, walked around the table, stood directly beside Bumpy. And then he did the unthinkable. He took that lit cigar, hot, glowing, still smoking, and pressed it against Bumpy's left cheek. Just for a second, just long enough to burn, to scar, to humiliate. The restaurant went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every fork froze mid-air, because everyone in that room knew what had just happened. Vinny Matches had just signed his death warrant. Bumpy didn't scream, didn't flinch, didn't even touch his face. He just sat there, the smell of burned flesh rising into the air, and looked up at Vinny with those cold, calculating eyes. "You done?" Bumpy asked quietly. Vinny grinned. "Yeah, I'm done." Bumpy nodded slowly, stood up, straightened his tie, and then he said, in a voice so calm it was terrifying, "Good, because now it's my turn." He walked out of Rouse restaurant at 9:47 p.m. Illinois, and Marcus followed. Behind them, Sal Moretti put his head in his hands. Tony Bianchi stared at Vinny in disbelief. And Vinny was still laughing, still drinking, still thinking he'd won. He had no idea that he'd just started a countdown, and the clock was ticking. Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story about revenge. It's a masterclass in patience, strategy, and the kind of calculated brutality that defines real power. Drop a comment and tell me, where are you listening from? New York? Los Angeles? London? Johannesburg? Let me know you're here. Let me know you're paying attention. This channel is about untold history, the moments that define the underworld, the justice that happened when the law looked the other way, the code that said, "You mark me, I erase you." Now let's go back to that night. Because 72 hours after Vinny Matches burned Bumpy's face, Vinny would learn what real fire feels like. Here's what you need to understand about respect in 1950s Harlem. It wasn't optional. It was currency. It was oxygen. It was the only thing that kept you alive. You could be violent. You could be ruthless. You could kill, steal, betray, as long as you followed the code. And the code said, you never ever disrespect a man in public. You never humiliate him in front of witnesses. You never touch him unless you're ready to die. Because public disrespect isn't just an insult. It's a challenge. It's a declaration of war. It's saying, I don't fear you. I don't respect you. You're nothing. And if you don't respond, if you let it slide, you're finished. Every two-bit hustler, every young punk, every wannabe gangster will think you're weak. And in Harlem, weakness is contagious. Weakness spreads. Weakness kills. So when Vinny Matches pressed that cigar into Bumpy Johnson's face, he wasn't just burning skin. He was testing him, challenging him, trying to prove that Bumpy was old, soft, irrelevant, that the Italians could do whatever they wanted, that Harlem was theirs for the taking. Bumpy understood that, and he understood something else. His response had to be public, had to be brutal, had to send a message so loud, so clear, so terrifying that no one, not the Italians, not the young hustlers, not the cops, would ever question his power again. Bumpy went home that night to his apartment on Edgecombe Avenue. Mamie was waiting for him. She saw the burn on his face immediately. Oh, God. Bumpy, what happened? He walked past her, went to the bathroom, looked in the mirror. The burn was about the size of a quarter. Red, blistering, right on his left cheek. It would scar, probably permanently. Mame came up behind him, touched his shoulder gently. Who did this? Bumpy didn't answer. He just stared at his reflection, at the mark, at the insult that would be on his face for the rest of his life. And then he said, so quietly Mame almost didn't hear him, someone who forgot what fire really is. Mame knew that tone. She'd been married to Bumpy for 15 years. She knew what it meant. Don't do this, she whispered. Let it go. It's not worth it. Bumpy turned to her. His eyes weren't angry. They were calm, frighteningly calm. It's not about worth, Mame. It's about principle. He burned me in front of a room full of people. If I don't respond, I'm dead. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon, because every hungry kid with a gun will think they can take me. Mame closed her eyes. When? 72 hours. Why wait? Because revenge without strategy is just violence, and I need this to be perfect. February 12th, 1953, 7 a.m. Bumpy sat in a diner on 125th Street with his inner circle. Illinois Gordon, Marcus Smooth Williams, Willie Fish Jackson, Raymond Quick Lewis, and a man named Thomas the Surgeon Blake, a specialist in interrogation, extraction, and making problems disappear. Bumpy laid a photograph on the table. Vincent Vinny Matches Calabria, 42 years old, made man in the Genovese family, lived in a brownstone in Little Italy. Married, no kids. Creature of habit. I want to know everything, Bumpy said. His routine, his hangouts, his vices, his fears. I want to know what he eats for breakfast and what he dreams about at night. Marcus pulled out a notebook. How much time do we have? 72 hours. Willie raised an eyebrow. Boss, that's not a lot of, it's all the time he's got, Bumpy said. His voice was ice. And when we move, it needs to be public. Witnesses. I want everyone to see what happens when you disrespect Harlem. Thomas the surgeon leaned forward. You want him gone? Bumpy touched the burn on his face, felt the raised skin, the permanent scar. No, I want him to wish he was gone. I want him to beg for death, and I want it to take a long time. By noon on February 12th, Marcus had a full dossier. Vinny Matches' routine was predictable. arrogant, sloppy. Every morning, 9 a.m., espresso at Ferrara's on Grand Street. Every afternoon, 2 p.m., lunch at Umberto's Clam House. Every evening, 6 p.m., drinks at a social club on Mulberry Street. Every night, 10 p.m., gambling in the back room of Rouse. The same Rouse where he'd burned Bumpy. He was comfortable, untouchable, protected by the Genovese name. Or so he thought. Marcus called Bumpy. We got him. But boss, there's a problem. What problem? He's always surrounded. At least 4 guys with him at all times. Genovese soldiers. They're not going to let us walk up to him. Bumpy was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We're not going to walk up to him. We're going to invite him." Marcus didn't understand. Invite him? Set up a meeting. Tell him I want to apologize. Tell him I'm willing to give the Italians whatever they want. Tell him I'm scared. Marcus hesitated. Boss, if you do that, everyone will think. Everyone will think I'm weak. Bumpy finished. Which is exactly what I want Vinny to think. Bring him to me, Marcus. Make him feel safe. Make him feel like he won. Marcus understood now. And he smiled. Because he knew what was coming. February 14th, 1953. 8 p.m. Valentine's Day. Vinny Matches received a phone call. It was Sal Moretti. "Vinny, we got a problem." "What kind of problem?" "Bumpy wants to meet. Says he wants to smooth things over. Says he's willing to negotiate." Vinny laughed. "Of course he does." The old man scared. "Where?" "Warehouse on the west side. Pier 57. 10 o'clock tonight. He says he'll come alone." Vinny thought about it. Alone? That's what he said. Vinny grinned. This was it. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. Bumpy Johnson, the so-called godfather of Harlem, crawling back to apologize, admitting defeat, publicly surrendering. Tell him I'll be there. And Sal? "I'm bringing 6 guys. Just in case the old man tries something cute." Sal didn't argue. "Be careful, Vinny." "Careful?" Vinny laughed. "I own him now. What's he going to do?" 10 o'clock. Pier 57. An abandoned warehouse on the Hudson River, the kind of place where cargo used to flow, and now only rats and shadows remained. Vinny Matches arrived with 6 men, all armed, all ready. They walked into the warehouse. It was dark, cold. The only light came from a single bulb hanging in the center of the room. And standing beneath that light, alone, was Bumpy Johnson. No Illinois, no Marcus, no crew, just Bumpy, wearing the same midnight blue suit, the burn still fresh on his face. Vinny walked toward him, his 6 men fanning out around the room. Well, Vinny said, grinning. Look who decided to show some respect. Bumpy didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there, calm, patient, waiting. Vinny stopped 10 feet away. "So what is it, Bumpy? You here to apologize? You here to beg? You here to kiss the ring?" Bumpy finally spoke. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. "No, Vinny. I'm here to teach you a lesson." Vinny laughed. "A lesson? You're alone, old man. I got 6 guns pointed at you right now. What lesson you gonna teach?" Bumpy smiled. That slow, terrible smile. The one about fire. And then the lights went out. All of them. The warehouse plunged into complete darkness. Vinny's men shouted, reached for their guns, spun around in the blackness, and then they heard it. Footsteps, dozens of them, surrounding them. From every direction, the lights came back on, and Vinny Matches realized he'd walked into a trap. 30 men, all of them Bumpies, all of them armed, surrounding Vinny and his 6 soldiers in a perfect circle. No escape, no exit, no mercy. Illinois Gordon stood to Bumpy's right, Marcus Williams to his left, and in Marcus's hand was something Vinny had never seen before in a mob confrontation, a blowtorch. Industrial, heavy, the kind used to cut through steel. Vinny's face went pale. "Bumpy, wait. Let's talk about this." "Let's? No more talking," Bumpy said. He stepped forward, touched the burn on his face. "You marked me, Vinny, in front of witnesses. You thought it was funny. You thought it made you strong." He gestured to his men. Take him. Pause for a second. If you're still here, if you're locked in, leave a comment right now. Tell me, do you think Bumpy's response was justice or brutality? Because this is where the story gets dark, and I need to know you're ready. Hit that like button if you believe some lessons can only be taught with fire. Now let's talk about what happened in that warehouse. Vinny's 6 men were disarmed in seconds, forced to their knees, not killed, not yet, because Bumpy wanted them to watch, wanted them to remember, wanted them to go back to the Genovese family and tell them exactly what happened when you disrespect Harlem. Vinny was dragged to the center of the room, tied to a chair, metal, bolted to the floor. He couldn't move, couldn't run, could only watch as Thomas the Surgeon Blake walked toward him carrying that blowtorch. Bumpy, please. Vinny's voice cracked. The arrogance was gone. The swagger vanished. Now he was just a man who knew he'd made a terrible mistake. I'm sorry, you didn't mean to disrespect me? Bumpy interrupted. You didn't mean to burn my face? You didn't mean to laugh while you did it? He walked closer, stood directly in front of Vinny. Yes, you did. You meant every second of it. You wanted to prove you were tougher than me, smarter than me, that I was nothing. So now I'm going to prove something to you. He nodded to Thomas. Light it. Thomas Blake ignited the blowtorch. The flame roared to life. Blue, white hot. The kind of heat that doesn't just burn, it melts, it erases, it turns bone to ash. Vinny started screaming before Thomas even touched him. Bumpy, no, please, I'll do anything. I'll pay you. I'll leave Harlem. You'll do exactly what I tell you, Bumpy said. You'll sit there. You'll take it. And you'll learn what real fire feels like. Thomas stepped forward, held the blowtorch inches from Vinny's left cheek, the same cheek where Vinny had burned Bumpy. The heat alone made Vinny's skin blister, made tears stream down his face, made him sob like a child. You want me to beg? Bumpy asked softly. You want me to apologize? You want me to admit you're stronger than me? Fine. I'm begging you, Vinny. I'm begging you to remember this moment, to remember what happens when you forget the rules, to remember that fire doesn't care how tough you think you are. He nodded again, and Thomas pressed the blowtorch against Vinny's face. The scream that followed wasn't human. It was primal, animalistic, the sound of a man being unmade. Thomas held the flame there for exactly 3 seconds. The same amount of time Vinny had held the cigar to Bumpy's face, and then he pulled back. Vinny's face was destroyed. The left side of his cheek was charred, black, the skin bubbling and peeling. The smell of burned flesh filled the warehouse. Vinny was sobbing, shaking, choking on his own screams. But Bumpy wasn't done. That's for the disrespect, Bumpy said. He walked around the chair, stood behind Vinny. Now this is for thinking you could walk away. He nodded to Thomas again, and Thomas moved the blowtorch to Vinny's right hand, the hand that had held the cigar, the hand that had burned Bumpy. No, Vinny whispered. Please, God, no. God's not here, Bumpy said. Just me. The blowtorch touched Vinny's palm, held there for 5 seconds, and when Thomas pulled away, Vinny's hand was a ruin. The flesh melted, the fingers curled and blackened, useless, destroyed, forever. Vinny passed out. His body couldn't take any more. Thomas stepped back, shut off the blowtorch. Bumpy looked at Vinny's 6 men, still on their knees, still watching, still alive. You see this? Bumpy said to them. You see what happens when you forget who you're dealing with? Go back to your bosses. Tell them exactly what you saw here tonight. Tell them that Harlem isn't soft, Harlem isn't weak, and Harlem doesn't forgive. He turned to Illinois. Take Vinny to Bellevue Hospital. Drop him at the emergency entrance. Let them save his life. I want him to survive. I want him to look in the mirror every single day for the rest of his life and remember. Illinois nodded. And them? He gestured to the 6 soldiers. Bumpy thought about it. Then he said, "Let them go. They didn't burn me. Vinny did. And they're going to spread the word better than any corpse could." The 6 men were released. They ran, didn't look back, didn't stop until they were miles away. And by sunrise, every mobster, every hustler, every cop in New York had heard the story. Bumpy Johnson had taken a man to a warehouse and burned him with a blowtorch. And the message was clear. You don't touch Bumpy. Ever. February 15th, 1953. 4:30 a.m. Vincent Vinny Matches Calabria was admitted to Bellevue Hospital with 3rd-degree burns to his face and right hand. The doctors worked for 6 hours, saved his life. But they couldn't save his face, couldn't save his hand. The left side of his face was permanently scarred. The right hand was amputated 2 weeks later due to infection. Vinny Matches, the man who'd burned Bumpy Johnson with a cigar, spent 3 months in the hospital. And when he was finally released, he didn't go back to the Genovese family, didn't go back to Little Italy, didn't go back to his life. He disappeared. Some say he moved to Florida. Some say he changed his name. Some say he drank himself to death in a trailer park in 1959. But nobody knows for sure. Because Vinny Matches became a ghost. A cautionary tale. A name whispered in back rooms to remind young mobsters what happens when you disrespect the wrong man. The Genovese family didn't retaliate. Sal Moretti met with Bumpy 3 weeks later, apologized on behalf of the family, said Vinny had acted without permission, said he deserved what he got. Bumpy accepted the apology. Business resumed. Territory lines were respected, and Harlem remained independent. Because the Italians understood something now. Bumpy Johnson wasn't just dangerous because he was violent. He was dangerous because he was patient, because he planned, because he turned insults into lessons and lessons into legends. And legends live forever. If you made it this far, thank you. This is what power looks like. Not recklessness, not rage, strategy, patience, the kind of calculated brutality that changes the game forever. Drop a comment. Was Bumpy justified? Or did he go too far? And if you want more stories like this, the untold moments that shaped the underworld, the justice that happened in the shadows, the code that kept Harlem alive, subscribe. Turn on notifications, because next week we're covering the night Bumpy walked into a room full of Italian mob bosses and walked out with a treaty that lasted 20 years. Hit that subscribe button, honor the history, and never forget, respect isn't given, it's earned, and sometimes it's burned into your memory. The burn on Bumpy Johnson's face never fully healed. It's scarred. A permanent reminder of the night Vinny Matches tried to humiliate him. But Bumpy never covered it, never hid it. He wore that scar like a badge, a symbol, a warning. People in Harlem would see it and remember the story. Remember what happened to the man who put it there. Remember that Bumpy Johnson didn't just survive disrespect, he answered it. And every young hustler, every wannabe gangster, every punk with a gun learned the lesson. You can fight Bumpy. You can scheme against him. You can try to take his territory. But you never, ever disrespect him. Because disrespect has consequences. And Bumpy's consequences were permanent. In 1965, a journalist asked Bumpy about the scar, about the warehouse, about Vinny Matches. Bumpy smiled, that slow, knowing smile, and said, "A man tried to burn me once, thought fire was a weapon. But fire is just a tool, and like any tool, it's only as dangerous as the man who wields it. He used fire to insult me. I used fire to teach him. And the difference between those two things, that's the difference between a punk and a king." The journalist pressed him. "Do you regret it?" Bumpy touched the scar on his face, thought about it, and then he said, "Regret? No. because that scar reminds me every day who I am, what I stand for, and what happens when people forget. It's not a mark of shame, it's a mark of survival. And survival in this world is the only victory that matters. Bumpy Johnson died in 1968, 15 years after that night in the warehouse. He died of a heart attack, surrounded by friends, in the Red Rooster Club on 138th Street. Thousands attended his funeral. Preachers, politicians, hustlers, musicians, working people. And at the funeral, an old man in the back, someone nobody recognized, whispered to the person next to him, "You see that scar on his face? That's the scar that kept Harlem free." Because it was true. That scar, that story, that night in February 1953, it became part of Bumpy's legend, part of Harlem's identity. A reminder that respect isn't negotiable. That power isn't about who hits first, it's about who hits last. And that fire, like violence, is a language. And Bumpy Johnson spoke it fluently.